to the Billy Dees podcast.
You're not that guy, pal. Trust me. You're not that guy.
It's not racist at all. No, not at all. It comes from China. That's why. It comes from China.
And by the way, I sit on the stand and it get hot. I got hairy legs that turn blonde in the sun. And the kids used to come up and reach into the pool. Oh no! And rub my leg down so it was straight, and then watch the hair come back up again. They'd look at it. So I learned about roaches. I learned about kids jumping on my lap.
You're not that guy.
Oh, really? I'll lead an effective strategy to mobilize true international effort to pressure.
Oh.
All right. Billy Dees right here. Welcome to the podcast. If this is your first time here, I am absolutely thrilled to have you. Radio version today, meaning audio only on this particular episode. However, we have some video podcast coming up very soon. Lots of authors. So if you're a book reader and you like what goes on in the process of writing a book and all these other good things, a lot of great content heading your way. Today, like I said, audio only commentary podcast. And what we are going to be talking about is wokeness. All right. And let me say a few things up front. Okay. Especially if you're new to the program here. All right. A lot of times I get pigeonholed. I get labeled a conservative, or I'll get labeled a liberal. And it just depends on what I am talking about. But I personally do not have an ideological filter. Okay. That's one of the things that I feel we have way too much of in today's society. Everything has to go through a filter. And everything is mutually exclusive. You're either for it or you're against it. If you're for this, well, then you have to be against this other thing over here. Two things, my friends, can exist at the same time. There can be two truths. There can be two sets of facts that exist in the same world. And we just don't have the patience anymore. We don't have the nuance to examine some of these things. And that's where I want to go with wokeness today. Okay, so first of all, I'm not taking a position on wokeness per se. All right. So if you're approaching this episode today and he's really going to give it to the woke people, or he's really going to stand up for being woke, I'm not going to do either. What I am going to try to do is bring some things into the discussion that may not normally be brought up because people are too passionate about the way they feel. They're too passionate about getting their personal agenda, their personal opinion across. And that's not what I'm about, first of all, with any given subject, and it's not going to be what I am going to do with wokeness. Also, while I am stating some things up front, I consider myself to be a person with a lot of empathy. And that is something that I don't feel we have enough of in today's society. And that's the part of wokeness that I like. We've come a long way just in the past couple of years with this concept. And I feel that overall, wokeness in a broad sense has done a lot of good. I personally have volunteered and worked in environments to promote diversity and safe work spaces over the last 18 months or so. And I firmly believe there's no wiggle room on this. No one, absolutely no one should ever have their rights violated or feel uncomfortable at work simply for who they are. That is not something that we can tolerate. It has to be fixed anytime it occurs. And that's the part of wokeness, like I said, that has done a lot of good. I got involved in some of these things because of the broader concept of empathy and understanding what other people go through. And I feel fairly good, I would say, overall about my behavior throughout my career toward other people. I feel very good about it. I can honestly say that I've always accepted people for who they are and just got down to work and do whatever needed to be done that day. But I have to say that being involved in these things lately, being involved in these discussions and actually talking to people who have experienced hardship in their workplace or what have you, has given me a greater appreciation for these matters. And I feel a lot more involved in that community now. And it's been a wonderful experience. And I would encourage everyone to take part in something, even if it's only an hour a week or an hour a month, whatever. Everybody's busy these days. But if you can work it in, it is such a worthwhile thing to do. You make some great friends, and you expand your knowledge of how people live in this world. It's a great thing. But like so many other things, what we do a lot of times is we take a concept like wokeness and we make it a litmus test. And it becomes a point to paint somebody. They're either woke or they're not. And here again, we don't have patience for nuance. And let me talk about this a little bit. That's what this episode is going to be about today. If I may, let me try to talk a little bit about my personal history. I was an only child, and my father had PTSD, and he had all of the negative symptoms that we associate with that. A temper that you couldn't predict on down the line. And although he was a good father, he never hit me or my mother, but he did leave a certain amount of trauma that I had to deal with later in life. And being an only child and dealing with this, it very much isolated me. And that was bad in a lot of ways. I didn't really have any close friends until later in life. I didn't even really have relationships in terms of dating until I was much older than my peers when they were having their first experiences with love and sexuality and all these other things. I was very much stinted. However, the one thing I will say is I did not have a lot of the influences that come from peer pressure. I didn't have older brothers molding my opinions about different races or women or anything like that. And I certainly didn't have close friends influencing me because I just simply was isolated in a lot of ways, emotionally and so on. And like I said, bad in a lot of ways, good in a lot of ways. One thing I kind of still retain to this day is I make people earn my trust. And that's not to say I dig them in a hole before they even have a chance to meet me. They simply start at zero and they go plus or minus from there. And it doesn't matter what color you are. It doesn't matter what religion you are. When I was growing up, everybody was somebody that was foreign to me. And one of the stories I remember that my mother told me was she dropped me off at kindergarten one day. And she stood on the side of the road. She parked off to the side of the road, whatever. And she watched me in the playground. And I stood against the fence until I studied all the rest of the kids. And I got like a little evaluation of all the kids. And then when I felt comfortable with who I figured them all out to be, then I proceeded forward. In a lot of ways, this hasn't done me any favors in life, But it's also, I apply the same attitude to whoever I meet. I don't have a litmus test. And that's one of the things that when we talk about prejudice, if you are going to resist a person because they are different than you are, simply because of that, when you first meet them, this person is not like me, I don't like them, that's wrong. However, if you say to yourself, this person looks like me, talks like me, is from my neighborhood, I like this person, that's equally as wrong in terms of trust. That person has done nothing to earn your trust any more than the person who is different from you has done anything to dissuade you from trusting them. And to say that this person is woke, that's one of the first pitfalls I'm going to talk about. Wokeness can become a disguise. That's one of the things I am going to talk about here today. The other thing I am going to talk about is wokeness does not account for personal responsibility. And that's something that I don't hear come up in the conversation too much when we evaluate who's woke and who isn't. And wokeness, third, does not account for your resolve, for what we used to term as grit in our personality. And here again, this isn't to endorse wokeness. This isn't to criticize wokeness. This is just to expand the conversation that we are having about being woke. All right, let's start with wokeness being a disguise that people wear. In a broad sense, this can apply to pretty much anything. You know, I worked in the bar business. I worked in the nightclub industry for many years. I worked in music. I did stand-up comedy for a while. And a lot of people don't understand, with my background being a loner and all these other things, how I ended up in all of these things where I'm standing in front of a lot of people. And I don't have an explanation for it. I don't know. If you were expecting me to say, well, here's why this is, I don't have that. But I can tell you I've observed people, the best and the worst of what people have to offer. And here again, talking about wokeness and some of the bad things that men will shout at women. In a nightclub situation, for example, there are guys who will stand on the railing overlooking a dance floor, and they'll shout things like, hey, baby, shake that ass. And that's something that I would never do. I never have done it, never would. But as uncouth as that is, as terrible of behavior as that is, very seldom is a guy who's going to do something really bad, like potentially assault somebody. Those guys almost never behave like that. They are too stealth for that. And women too. I can tell you that women very much can be predators. And I've traveled a lot in my younger days, and I would go into bars, let's say in Vegas or something like that. Women would recognize men from out of town. And anytime a beautiful girl just came out of nowhere and was all interested in me, like, oh, wow, where are you from? What'd you do? Oh, that's so exciting. And they're all enamored with me. That's a red flag. Okay. Because here's where I'm going with this. People who are really predators, people you really have to watch out for, don't stand on bar stools and shout at the crowd. They are stealth. They act the way you want them to act. They smile at the right times. They say the things that you want to hear. And it's when you least expect it that the strike comes. I never traveled and went home with a woman that I just met. Never. And I would never tell anyone to do it. That's something that is part of who I am. I'm too careful. Here again, people have to earn my trust. And I'm not going to go home with someone I just met, even if it's in my hometown. It's just not going to happen. And this is where where an individual has to earn your trust, is where I'm at with this. Just because I may like wokeness and you act woke doesn't mean you're my pal. I get, a lot of times we talk about prejudice. Prejudice is just prejudging. I'm a middle-aged white dude. Okay, I get prejudged all the time. I'm conservative. I'm not. I had somebody very honestly, and this was part of the discussions I was talking about. I had the term now Latinx. I had a Latinx woman say to me recently that you being a middle-aged white guy, I never would have imagined that you would have anything to say that I would be interested in until I've gotten older and I've learned to break those barriers. You have to let the individual earn your trust. They have to sink or swim as an individual in your circle of trust. And saying this person should be out or this person should be in based on a litmus test regarding an ideology or a political affiliation or any of these types of things, you are setting yourself up. You have to let that person be themselves, let them be who they are, and decide whether this is a relationship that's going to work or not on its own merits. A similar topic, political correctness. One of the things that I don't like about political correctness that no one seems to talk about is it encourages people to be someone that they're not, to hide who they really are. That's one of the things about political correctness that I do not like, because here's the thing. I can tell you that people who may not use the right terminology, they may not use the terminology that fits with political correctness. They may not use the verbiage that fits being woke. They might not go along with all of the quote unquote new ways of behavior in a politically correct society. A lot of those people are the very people who you can really count on when the chips are down. Someone who smiles all the time, always has the right thing to say, is always willing to get on board with some new progressive reform and be so likable. These are the people that me personally, I'm never quite sure about. Because you can be all of the things that you present to be on the outside. And it's not until you're in the foxhole and you're coming under fire and mortars are landing all around your foxhole, that's when the real person shows his face. I have a couple of religious buddies that don't particularly like it when I talk about evolution, okay? And they may not like it when somebody else talks about homosexuality. But I know these people. And if it comes down to them putting their job on the line to stand up for you in a situation where you need support, they are the ones who's going to do it. They're not going to care what your sexual preference is. They're not going to care what you believe about religion or don't believe. They're going to do the right thing. And someone who says all the right things and supports you all the time in the hallway when you're at the water cooler or getting the morning coffee and donuts, that person is going to be somewhere else when the shooting starts. So don't be so quick to dismiss somebody because they're not using the right terminology that fits wokeness or fits what you're comfortable with. Because at least that person is being honest about who they are. And that's worth something. It's worth something in how I operate. It may not be with you, but here again, as a talking point, this is something that we need to talk about. in terms of just because someone claims to be woke and says all the right things does not mean behind the scenes they're not going to stab you right in the back. The next thing that I kind of want to touch on in terms of wokeness, if that's a word, is wokeness doesn't often enough take into account personal responsibility. And that's a big one. Because no matter how much the playing field has been cleared for you, sooner or later, you have to pick up the ball and run with it. Getting across that line is dependent on your desire to achieve. And I'm of the age, as they say now, I'm of the age where ageism is a thing. And that's a very real thing, and it shouldn't be. But I have a lot of friends who have experienced it, and a lot of times people just presume that you're not going to understand progressive ideas because you're of a certain age, you're that generation, and all these other cliches that pigeonhole you, that brand you into something because you are of a certain age. Well, and another one is technology. A lot of people just presume that because you are of a certain age, you may not use an app. I have a couple buddies, one in particular, who's much older than I am. As a matter of fact, he retired and then came out of retirement because he didn't like doing nothing. And his whole background is in software. He can actually write the code, Python and all these others, to actually create apps. So he can not only use an app, but he can build one. And oftentimes he tells me these people over here, they just presume that I didn't know anything about this new app because I'm of a certain age. And along these lines, I have had associates my age and older who have come to me and said, I didn't get the job because I'm of a certain age. And there's no question that happens. I have no doubt that it happens. And it shouldn't happen. Because like I just said, there's a lot of times when just the opposite is true. These people are more dedicated and more capable a lot of times than the other candidates that they're up against who might be younger. But that being said, I've had other individuals. And this is just being completely honest, come up to me and say, I didn't get the job because I'm of a certain age. And when they say those words, a little voice comes out in my head and says, you were a pain in the ass when you were 25 years old and I wouldn't have hired you then. Because their whole life, there's always been an excuse. When they were 25 years old, people didn't like them because they just didn't like them and they were all stuck up. And their family won't talk to them because their family's nuts. The fact that they caused nothing but trouble for their family doesn't even come up in the conversation. And they're at where they're at right now because of their own actions. But now it's because they're older. And it's hard to separate. When somebody comes up to you and says something like that, it's hard to separate which one is it. And I would be willing to bet that all of us out there, no matter what demographic you belong to, no matter what group you belong to, the too young or too old or too this or that, we've all had those voices go off. We know when people are using an excuse. And the simple fact of the matter is that your accountability, how you prepare for what you want in life, what are the sacrifices that you've made? These are all very important because no matter how woke, no matter how politically correct the world is, no one is going to hand you anything. And that has to be a part of the conversation. That has to be a part of how we evaluate who is successful and who isn't. Your drive, what you want out of life, your goals, all are a part of how our society functions. And this kind of leads us into my third point about wokeness, in that it doesn't really account for grit. It doesn't really account for resolve. As I mentioned at the top of the program, no one should ever feel unsafe or unwanted in their work environment, in their neighborhood, anything. No one's rights should ever be violated. But most of the adversity that we encounter from other people through the course of a day or whatever the case may be is usually much more subtle than that. And here's what I mean by that. Getting back to how society functions, the cell phone that you have in your hand, or the car you're driving in, the airplane that you flew on when you went on vacation, the buildings that you stay in, the home itself, all of these things exist because a lot of people got up in the morning and went to work. And they went to school to prepare for those jobs, or they acquired skills. And along the way, they had a teacher. They had a supervisor that didn't like them. Or they had people talk behind their back about things that are going on in their personal life. And the world cannot stop every single time this happens. The world cannot function that way. And getting back to grit and resolve, those are kind of old school terms. But let's talk about high school for a moment. The popular kids don't always go on to be the most successful kids in life, the successful adults in life. They're the ones who very often have an early midlife crisis when they're like 35 years old because 19-year-old girls don't fall at their feet anymore. Or they're stuck in a mid-level job at 40 because all the doors that opened for them when they were 21 and dashing don't open like that anymore. And the nerds, the people who weren't noticed, those are the people who have grit. Those are the people who have resolve. Those are the people who don't have a midlife crisis because they've always had to deal with who they really are. They've always known who they really are. And they go out and start $1 billion company, or they go out in a field of medicine and create drugs and treatments that help people and make the world a better place because they have grit. They got through it. And do you know what they understand that the popular kids don't understand? They understand that the best revenge to being looked over, the best revenge to being smirked at, the best revenge for not being invited to the prom is being successful. That's what when you encounter resistance, it can be something positive. It can be something that drives you. It can be something that you use to propel yourself into areas that you may never have gone had you been one of the popular people, had you been one of the people who always had the red carpet rolled out for them. So resolve and grit, it is something that needs to be valued. What you overcome in terms of what other people's expectations were of you at one time, that's part of what can make you better than you could have ever been otherwise. So anyway, those are my talking points about wokeness. And although I feel wokeness is overall, in a broad concept, something very important, we have to have more empathy in our society. We have to be more aware of what other people go through. That's very important. But we also have to realize that wokeness can be a disguise. How many times has this happened now with celebrities who are always on their high horse about some kind of a cause, and then what happens? Some video surfaces of them shouting a bunch of hateful stuff, or some tweet shows up. Don't be fooled by someone's wokeness any more than you're fooled by what they believe in or their political ideology or whatever. Let the person stand on their own terms and show you who they are. We cannot discount personal accountability. You know, there's a lot to be said for the old adage, the harder I worked, the luckier I got. That is so true. And encouraging people to work hard and be everything that they aspire to be through their own effort, that can't be ignored. If it doesn't matter how free the world is from negativity, if you don't have that, your goals are not going to be achieved. And let's give a lot of credit for the grit that people have to overcome their circumstances, to endure criticism, to endure the naysayers, and have become these astonishing, amazing people. These are all things that we need to talk about when we evaluate the role of wokeness in terms of how we evaluate our interactions in our society and who becomes successful. All very important things. All right, I'm Billy Dees. And if you have an opinion about being woke, well, I'll tell you what. You can find me real easy on Twitter at Billy Dees. You just have to be nice. That's what I always say. It's okay to disagree. And there's been a lot of people that have disagreed with me over the years. You just have to be nice. Feel free to tweet me at Billy Dees. And you can find me on pretty much all the major social media. Real easy, Billy Dees, or a variation thereof, Billy Dees Podcast, something like that. I don't use anything different other than Billy Dees. Thank you very much for listening to the program, and just a couple final words here from some good friends of ours.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nick Palatichuk. I'm an independent film director and screenwriter. I'm also an independent comic book artist and creator. I want to let you know about my podcast, the St. Paul Filmcast. It's a weekly podcast where I interview other independent filmmakers and other artists from the Twin Cities area. You can find the show on Stitcher, Spotify, iTunes, and Amazon Radio, as well as distributor Podbean. You can follow the show on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. So, if you're interested in how independent films get made or the process of filmmaking, also, if you're interested in other artists' process and works as well, tune into my show, the St. Paul Filmcast, where it's not over till the guests say it's over.
Well, hello everyone. I am Billy Dees from the self-titled Billy Dees Podcast. You can find me on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and many more of the best podcast networks. Join me for my commentary and interviews. Follow me on Twitter, real easy to find, at Billy Dees. I am Billy Dees. I'd love to have you listen in.